Jonathan Fisher, welcome to the show, man.
Oh, thanks so much, Chad. It's
Yeah.
really great to talk with you again.
Well, it is great to talk with you again. You were on the Big Self show. Now you're on The Humanists, which it's a different show, but in some ways it is the same. Many of the same values. I just want to say I am still reading. I've read most of your book and I've, absorbed it, but just One Heart, this book that you are, I don't know, it's getting out into the world each and
Mm.
every day is a beautiful, wonderful book. You're like you may have been a doctor for over 2 decades, but what you have another calling. You are a good writer.
Oh,
This is a really good book.
thank you. I didn't know I was going to be blushing this early in the conversation.
I don't, usually get this effusive to folks when I'm talking, but maybe I shouldn't be surprised, but
Mm.
I was like, it's very engaging, really readable. And of course, I really love the message.
Mm. Thank you, Chad. It's really, I think I was a writer in some other life, and I used to write poetry as a little kid, and then medical school kind of squeezes that out of you and it points you in a different direction. I guess it's activating the left side of the brain instead of the right. And it's been such a
Yeah.
fun adventure, really becoming a writer and then eventually becoming an author, which is a completely different experience, as you know.
Yes. And I think that's why I was so you took your time and you just wrote this on your own. You didn't
Yeah.
have like a ghostwriter or anything. Yeah.
No, no, I started out with literally about 10,000 notes that I had. I used to use an app, Evernote, I think it was. And I had started
Yes.
a journal 20 years ago on paper, and then I was embracing the digital, so they were all digital. And I said, what am I going to do with these? And so 2 years ago, I just took the plunge. Someone else wanted to interview me for a book, and she said she had a great experience with this publisher, self-publishing assistant, and that was 2 years ago. And I have to say, I wrote the book, but I didn't write the book. And what I mean by
Mm.
that is, I had a series of 5 editors working with me on a weekly basis for 2 years, back and forth and back and forth. And after that, I had a dozen almost I would call them like professional readers and writers. So people who were professors of philosophy and psychology and cardiology, who all had either written books or journal articles, and then my
Mhm.
wife, who's an avid reader. So I got a ton of feedback about how crappy my book was along the way, so
That's
that
the
I could
process, man.
fine
That's the
tune it,
process.
right?
It does. It takes a village. It takes a team to do these. But you're being, I get you're being modest, but that is the truth. Sometimes that's how the sausage is made. Well, one of the things, we don't usually start off. I usually just kind of start in the middle of the action with some of these conversations. I like to think of them as more of conversations and less as just interviews.
Mm.
But we rarely just begin with the story of someone's life because that can get tedious in a lot of cases. But
Mm.
in your case, and you share it in the prologue, but I think it's a really worthwhile if you would just kind of
Mm.
begin us, if you would, with this starting around like 1994 when
Mm.
you began medical school and just
Yeah.
some of that experience and
Mm.
what you were talking about already having maybe not like qualms or misgivings, but you were
Mm.
already beginning to struggle, the role
Mm.
of your sister, and then
Yeah.
that moment where you talk about just this moment where things shifted for you. Can you
Mm.
share that with us?
Yeah, it's so interesting, Chad, this idea of telling a story and then telling our story, and how much our stories, one, either change or don't change in the telling and in the remembering. So in
Oh yeah.
each time I remember the story, something else it comes up in my heart, and it'll probably come up now. Um, and
Okay.
and then there's always a risk of I firmly believe that we are our stories, but we're not defined by them. And so, with that as a kind of a backdrop, I'm from a medical family. I mean, we're a legacy.
Mhm.
My dad, who is going to be 98 next month, it was the town doctor for a small town in New Jersey. He was like the who was the guy who did the paintings of the small town doctors?
Norman Rockwell?
Yeah, Norman Rockwell. So my dad was like the Norman Rockwell guy with the bag and the thing on his forehead, and so seven children in the family all followed in his footsteps, and I was the baby duckling, number seven. And I really had, I think, a misguided view of what it meant to be a doctor. I really did. I thought, well, this is going to be like an easy in for me to stay mentally challenged, to really feel a sense of reward by learning all this
Yeah.
stuff and then using it and helping people. And then people are going to need me. They're going to like me. And only later, after therapy and a lot of work about why I was feeling dissatisfied, did I realize that there was maybe a darker motivation in becoming a helper and a healer. And it had a lot more to do with the need to feel validated by other people and the
Yeah.
need to feel needed, which I think is at play with a lot of us. So
Oh,
that's where
all
I,
of us.
yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. So that's kind of where I came from. And then I was always a very sensitive kid, and even the sight of blood, like when I would see it during I shouldn't tell you this, but as a doctor, as a heart doctor, when I saw blood kind of squirting for the first time, I was like, oh no, I don't know if I
Yeah.
can do this. But
Wow.
I stuck it
Yeah.
out, and because I knew that this was an avenue to really get to help people, like where it counts. And all the while, I was so caught up in my studies and with being the best, quote unquote, and achieving success, in quotes, as I defined it then,
Mhm.
getting into Harvard. And really, if I couldn't be the best, I almost didn't have a sense of that I was worthy of,
Mm.
my parents' attention and their love, which really it seemed to be dependent in a way on how much we all achieved. Now I love my parents, and like many parents, they really put an emphasis on academic achievement. And so that's kind of where I started, Chad. We
Yeah.
can go
Okay.
wherever we want from there.
Okay. So, well, and so there were times of discouragement, and you had a sister
Mm,
who would say, "Hey, take it a little easier on yourself."
yeah, yeah. Andrea was really my best friend. I was a shy and lonely kid, really good at academics, but I was always at the side of the party. And Andrea, when I was in late high school and college, started to notice what eventually was diagnosed as depression before anyone else
Mm.
did. And this was in the 90s when, we didn't
Mhm.
realize that, now it's an epidemic, anxiety and depression among our children. And so she said, can you, this is back in like the original text messages or instant whatever. She said, you seem really tough on yourself and you're just so harsh. And that's like how you're trying to be successful is beating yourself up. Can you
Mhm.
just be kind to yourself? And I had never heard that phrase before, and it still gets me when I hear it. Because as you know, and you read the story, Andrea is no longer with us.
Yeah.
Andrea, who was then 40 years old with a small
Yeah.
child, and happened to be a radiologist, the doctor who looks inside our bodies. She read her own brain scan, and when she had blurred vision back then, and she saw that there was a tumor the size of a golf ball, which we discovered over the next year that no one in the world would dare to touch. So over 4 years, I experienced profound grief and
Yeah.
sadness and loss even before she was gone. And then after she was gone, I was a mess. I was just a shell going and having to go through the motions of helping other people, thousands of people a year in my clinic and in the intensive care unit, while I was just a shell and a dark hole on the inside. My heart was totally, totally broken.
Yeah. And okay, and thank you for sharing that with us again. And it does sound, I don't know how long ago that was, but but then I forget the exact details, but
Mm.
were you in another country and you were driving and
Yeah,
you
yeah.
had
So that
a bit of
was
a mystical moment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Andrea passed in 2010, so a good 14 years ago. And then a few years later, I did everything. I mean, I was desperate. I went to therapy. I took medication like antidepressant, anxiety medications, all the things that doctors don't want the regular world to know that we have to do as well, because we are human beings and we're
Yeah.
not superheroes. And I just need to say that. And so there was and then I went on retreats, meditation retreats, yoga retreats, Tai Chi,
Wow.
Qigong. I was desperate. So I searched around the world for some way to just feel whole again, to fill that hole in my heart. And one of those ways, thank God, was my wife, who really helped me all the while. She's a physician too, and she's
Okay.
dealt with death and dying. She's a cancer doctor. And we were on a vacation in Scotland. And I was rushing, like in my typical doctor's mode, like, okay, let's get to the next stop. I don't want to stop. We
Yeah.
gotta
That's how
go.
I am when we travel.
Yeah.
I, I
So it's like I was just that's what you do. And she said, "Oh, stop the car. It's like 5 p.m. We're driving on a lane in Scotland. We're driving up towards I think it was Edinburgh,
Mhm.
and from the airport on our first day, I was exhausted. She said, "Pull over." And I was like, "Honey, no, we don't have time." She said, "Trust me, pull over." So I pulled over the car. She's like, "Now look at that. Isn't that amazing?" And I looked out her window and it was like grass and shrubs, and maybe there was like a sheep or something. I was like, thanks, but why did you stop me for that? She said, you dummy. I can see that you're caught up in your own mind. Get out of the car and look outside. And so I got out of the car, I stepped back, and over the car, I saw a sight that I had never in my life seen, which was a double rainbow that spanned the entire horizon. There's this rolling green hills, and I had this moment where it was this mixed moment where it was like incredible beauty and awe and wonder, and at the same time there was this realization that I had missed so many of these rainbows in my life that were there, but I never stopped the car and got out and took a look.
Yeah. Wow. That's a lot. I mean, we should just, I think, sit with that. How many are we all missing as well in the rush of our lives? But you recount this in your book, and you think that you define it as a turning point moment for you.
Mm,
It
yeah,
didn't even have to be that. And
yeah,
I guess you mentioned here at the beginning of you talk about the remembering self
yeah,
and the experiencing self. The remembering self really used that as a leverage point of a kind of waking up. Maybe the time
yeah,
was right for you.
yeah.
And so then what was the process like of
Mm,
you through all of the other work? Maybe you had set the motion
mm,
set with the retreats and the readings and the therapy you had been going to. How did things begin to renew for you as you emerged from, was it
mm,
burnout or
mm.
depression?
Yeah, it was both. It was a combination, beginning with a personality that was high on on the five factor scale of neuroticism, the N, and
Okay.
so high on conscientiousness, low on extroversion. So I was like an introverted neurotic, basically, and so that's where I was starting from. And on top of that, because of social isolation, depression set in. And I had this really powerful habit of ruminating on
Mm,
everything. And it was usually
mhm,
negative thoughts. So it
mm,
really, Chad, was a combination of anxiety, depression, and then put that into a workplace that doesn't seem to give a, I won't use my French here, but it doesn't seem to care about the individual worker in healthcare and other places.
right.
And burnout is real, and it's different in all industries. Healthcare is particularly toxic, and that combination was devastating for me. I was a lousy husband. I came home at the end of each day and I didn't have anything in my tank. I was a lousy father, and I don't want to share the stories of some of my how I behaved with my children. That's another day.
Yeah.
And I and and again, it comes back to my wife, Julie, who at one point she doesn't put up with a lot, and I'm so lucky for that. She said, John, she said, Johnny, like I understand that this is hard, And it's not an excuse to take it out on other people. And you've got more work to do. And I'll support you in that work. And what it looked like for me, Chad, was ultimately finding a way to take my own suffering, and I'm going to call it that, not to magnify it, but it was suffering, emotional, it
Yeah.
was physical, to take my own suffering and to find some way of putting meaning to that,
Hmm.
so that in the future I could look back and say, I should not have lost my sister. I should not have lost my best friend. This is a horrible moment in my life. How can I take this information, this experience, my own struggles, and use it to help other people so that it will have been meaningful, and if anything, in a weird way, maybe even have been a blessing in a strange way. And so I did that by, this is what doctors do. We have a code. If you're learning to do surgery, which I don't do, by the way, I do other types of heart procedures, there's this code in medicine which says, see one, do one, teach one. And I realized that for me, the meaning of what I had gone through was in that process. I had seen it and been in it. And it was my time to kind of help teach, or really share with vulnerability and openness with other doctors and nurses and healthcare leaders, that we're not superheroes. It's okay to bring your human full self, and to embrace your humanity and to bring it with you. So that, I think, Chad, was my overarching philosophy that helped me get out of this deep, dark place.
Okay. Wow. Well, I think, and then that explains a little bit your message in the book. Um, I was thinking, what a marvelous book for people to be hearing from, yeah, a doctor, right? Because and maybe your background, your experience with working on mindfulness, going on these different kinds of retreats, and the practices you've had has led to this integration. It seems like, of really looking at the whole self. And there's a lot of directions I'd like to go, and a lot
Mm,
of curiosities I
mm,
have. One of the well, overall, I think, you can share this in your own ways here,
mm,
but it's like you clearly you're on a mission to help people recognize that the medical model is broken. You're not trying to just, we obviously are doing too much symptom management and not enough prevention. And so a lot of what you're looking at, and by the way, too, like, right, there's a lot of books on neuroscience these days, and
mm,
what stress is doing in the brain and how it's affecting the body. And I like your message of,
mm,
like, the connecting it really specifically as an expert of the heart.
mm,
Well, let's just I mean, one curiosity I have, because I think it would be a great message for people to hear coming from a medical doctor, is this idea of, like, tell us about the four hearts, right?
mm.
We obviously have the physical heart. Could you I'm curious about these four, and especially coming from you.
Thank you, Chad. This all came from, now this came from not my personal life, but I experienced these almost in parallel, but more in my clinic. I have typically would have 2 to 3,000 patients come to me every year, and I would knock on the door, open the door, and meet somebody new or somebody following up who had some heart condition, or was going to get one, or was worried
Mhm.
about one. But usually it's somebody who's worried, who's afraid. Because dad had his first heart attack when he was 56 years old, and this person is exercising, and they're doing everything right. They're not smoking, and yet their blood pressure is high and their cholesterol is not good, and something is happening with their hearts. And people come to me, and for about a decade, I practiced the standard medical approach, which was, we're going to do thousands of dollars of tests. I'm going to prescribe medications for you. I'm going to tell you to look at stress in your life, but not really tell you how or spend much time on it. I'm going to send you to the self-help book section in the library. And I just felt like I was almost leaving people without a real clear guide of the fullness of our hearts. And
Yeah.
it became clear to me that we were missing the mark, and we cardiologists, and I love my colleagues. I mean, there's like 100,000 cardiologists, I guess, in the Western world, and many of us are missing the mark still. We're focused on the physical, we're focused on technology. And so as I asked my patients what was really hurting, once we talked about chest pain and all, I found out that there were 4 dimensions of the human heart that were suffering. And not only that, they are intertwined. They were each affecting each other. So the first is the physical. The second, at a very basic level, is the emotional. The third is the social. And the fourth is the spiritual. And in my side reading, these were metaphors. These are metaphors that are all over the place. You've got people talking about, I'm a heart-centered leader, which means they lead with empathy and compassion. And people saying, my spirit is, my heart is filled with the Spirit of God. So in the spiritual world, we use the heart metaphor. And people say, my heart is broken, meaning they've got grief and sadness. So in the emotional world, and so it was initially just a metaphor. And then I said, I got to research this stuff because there's these other 3 dimensions are driving disease or health in the physical heart. And I was shocked at what I found.
And what did you find?
Well,
that's what I'm like. Maybe that's what the book is about, right?
yeah.
Well, I think, I am most curious, I suppose, just naturally here about the emotional, like right now. Because we talk about emotional intelligence. It's gained a lot of traction over the past 30 years that we've sort of been describing here in our own lives. And you also, as I recall, you differentiate, and I think it's an important distinction between feelings and just an emotion.
Yeah.
And sometimes we do too. Like I think of moods as being different than emotions. I don't know if you're using just different terminology, but how does this emotional heart impact people's well-being?
I think definitions are really important. And Brene Brown, in her book, The Atlas of the Heart, which I discuss, explains that we still can't agree on what is an emotion. And then you can look it up and you can find 10 different definitions. So I've looked at all the definitions, and I like the work of Anthony Damasio, a neuroscientist, psychologist, and he distinguishes between emotions and feelings. And it also makes sense intuitively how I experience them. We think about emotions and feelings being the same thing. I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling happy, angry. And really, to understand the impact of emotions on our physical body, the mind-body connection, it's helpful to separate emotions from feelings. So emotions, it comes from Latin. It means e movere. The purpose of an emotion is to literally move the body in some direction. Emotions are an immediate, instinctive, visceral, evolutionarily derived response to something. It could be a bad smell, it's disgust. It could be a lion coming at us, or a negative emoji causing fear or anger. So that's the initial, and that happens with it. There's a different time scale from emotions to feelings to moods. And I kind of discussed this in the chapter on the science. The emotions happen in an instant, right? We get a gut feeling, we get a clenching in our heart, we start to perspire. Feelings are when we interpret the emotions, in other words, the sensations in our body, and we add some meaning to them. We begin to tell a story about the sensations in our body. And that becomes a feeling. And a feeling is a little bit more complex than an emotion. A feeling can be, a grief or a longing or a sadness, etc. And then if that goes on for days or weeks and we get stuck in, let's say, cynicism or avoidance or loneliness, that's a mood. So moods can last for hours or days or weeks, whereas emotions and feelings are immediate. And I think a lot of this work of emotional intelligence, Chad, and I know that you're an expert in this area, a lot of the work, and there's evidence showing that so much of the suffering and discomfort that we feel is not because of our emotions. It's because we misinterpret sensations in our body. I may feel a palpitation in my chest and immediately start to think, I'm having a heart attack, I'm having anxiety, I'm under threat. When in reality, I may just be going to give a public talk on stage and nothing bad is going to happen to me. But it's the interpretation of our own bodily sensations, or misinterpretation, that if we realize that, then we can put the work in to get really good at number one, becoming aware of our bodily sensations. That's the core of mindfulness. Mindfulness has very little to do with the mind. It has everything to do with the body
Nice. Yeah.
and the
That's
raw
awesome.
sensations of the body. And it has a lot to do with, am I correctly interpreting what my own body is telling me? Am I
Hmm.
listening to the wisdom of my heart, or am I misinterpreting it, leading me to some kind of fear, panic, or dread?
Wow, that's helpful right there. Okay. Well, I don't know how far away this will take us or not, but what you were just saying, because I'm trying to follow my curiosities and not just ask scripted questions. And as you're talking, I'm reminded of the research that came out just popular stuff that we're all familiar with, I think, the Gabor Mate's When the Body Says No. And one of the things that was the most, I guess, unsettling
Mm,
about some of his research was this idea that when we're in chronic stress,
mm,
especially chronic stress, and I know that you could detail what's going on in the heart and the body under stress, and maybe we need to go there, but the thing that's unsettling is sometimes we can be under constant acute stress
mm,
and not be even feeling it at all.
mm.
But the body is like dealing with it.
Yeah.
And I guess I found it unsettling because it's like we're used to when you're pointing it out, like there's this like, okay, I'm feeling stress and now I can choose, at least I can
Mm,
choose how to respond to that.
mm.
If we don't even sometimes feel it or know it,
Yeah.
what then?
Yeah, it's you're raising such an important kind of nuance, a side note, which I think is pretty common, that we are so distracted, whether it's, scrolling on our devices or watching the news, we're not at all in touch with our bodies or in tune with our bodies. And eventually, there's almost a disconnection between the mind and the body, or the mind and the heart, where we become numb to our own bodies. I know this
Yeah,
because I lived half of my life separated from my own body. I was this kind of walking brain, and it was only through yoga and Tai Chi and Qigong and, self-compassion practice that I started
yeah.
to wake up my body. Fortunately, Chad, I interviewed Gabor Mate for my book, and he was incredibly helpful when we
Oh,
talked about how these are stored in the body. And, it, I think it's helpful also. There was another scientist who I interviewed, Dr. Stephen Porges, which the question that you're asking relates to one of his discoveries in what's called polyvagal theory, which, not to get too nerdy here, but there's a second, if you want to get into the science, all the research is in the back of the book. But what Stephen
yeah.
Porges talks about is that our main calming nerve in the body, this vagus nerve,
Mhm.
only in the last 4 decades has it been discovered that there's actually kind of two branches to it. There's the branch involved in fight or flight, which is what you're describing. I can feel it.
Yeah.
But then there's another branch where we're kind of numb, and it's kind of causes us to freeze under stress, where we start to disassociate from our own body. And it's really interesting. Some of this still has to be discovered. But to your point, the first step in resolving whatever it is that's bringing us down is to tune back into our bodies, to wake up to our senses. As the founder of mindfulness in the West, John Kabat-Zinn, I believe he
Hmm.
wrote a book called Coming to Our Senses. And so it's normal. It's normal if we're busy entrepreneurs, business people, whatever we are, that we lose touch with our basic information, which is our emotions. And the beginning of the work, either with a therapist or with a somatic counselor, whoever, is getting back into the body itself.
That's super helpful. I mean, I feel like that's a takeaway right there for people is like you're just saying first of all, you don't know what you don't know, right? So, oh well, right. I guess but we can at least do what we can to bring ourselves more into our bodies.
Mm,
So we've talked a little bit about like the head. We're talked a fair amount about and you're just encouraging people to like be in your body
mm,
as well. And that is I think more and more as I coach and you're right. It's like we're trying to integrate all three of these things: body, heart, and head.
Mm,
What so okay. One feature of your book is you talk about how many of these different, like you talk about a number of different principles to in the
mm,
second half of your book.
yeah.
Um, I am thinking there's, they're all rich.
Mm,
Let's, if we could, talk about the sort of emotional disposition of courage.
mm,
Could we talk about that
yeah.
one? Because so this is interesting. So we're talking, we've done a lot of emotions here, and that's kind of where we seem to be going in this
Mm,
conversation. I don't know what you think about the medical doctor who is also a philosopher and a spiritual teacher, David Hawkins.
mm,
And he died in 2012, and
mm,
he's published many books.
mm,
And uh, I found I find his work very profound, but I
mm,
think that he's also known to be kind of controversial. And one of the things that I think people are like not so sure about is this way he created a chart that puts a sort of a vibrational
mm,
energy
yeah.
associated with each level of
Mhm,
emotion.
yeah.
And in the negative, some people don't even like to use the term negative emotions, but
Right.
I'm just gonna use it. Like when you're in a negative emotional state of
Mhm,
different kinds of depression, apathy,
mhm,
resignation, they're vibrating at these lower levels. And then you get up
mhm,
to anger, and he kind of measures anger at 175, which
mhm,
is like the highest resonating emotional state that's still negative, which is
mhm,
interesting, right? It's
mhm,
anger's energizing. You just
mhm,
don't want to stay there.
yeah.
But then courage, he has at this level 200, the
Mm,
first positive emotion, vibrational energy.
mm,
I just find that super interesting. I don't
mhm,
know exactly how we quantify the measurements,
mhm,
um, but courage is powerful
yeah.
and it's positive.
Yeah.
So, could you share with us some of like what you write about in your book related to courage?
I, I wrote this book, Chad, because I needed it, and I needed a handbook that I wish I had had when I was dealing with anxiety and fear and loneliness. So any chapter in the book, any ideas in the book, yes, it's all deeply science based, and I
Hmm.
never rely on any one individual and that person's theory in this. I have this book has to stand up. I give presentations in hospital systems and medical grand rounds where if I were to say a theory that was a little bit kind of out there, woo woo, mumbo jumbo, that didn't have a good science basis to it, I would get tomatoes on my face. So
Yeah.
I'm doing a fine dance here, and I'm intentional about this with this book. What I'm
Okay.
trying to do is I'm trying to establish a common language that those of us in both the scientific and spiritual, psycho-emotional communities can start to come together and realize that we have just one heart. And for those that are obsessed with the science, yeah, the citations are there. For those who are in the science but haven't thought about the spiritual piece, I try to almost make it easy to just put your toe in the water. And I define spirituality in kind of almost in scientific terms as we understand it in the community so that we can become more comfortable. And that would include the field of energetics or bioenergetics that you're talking about and all of that. With that being said,
Okay.
one of the traits that I was really lacking, Chad, was courage. I was lacking it because I didn't stand up for myself in high school. I was bullied, and I talk about that openly in the book. I wish that I had had more courage, and I don't even know where I would have gotten it. When I was in college, I had a couple of professors who said things to me and put me down in ways that went far beyond just normal feedback. They were kind of mean-spirited, and I didn't stand up for myself. And that happened again in medical school. And then I heard stories of particularly female physicians who were abused emotionally, even harassed physically, and then in the business world. And I saw that courage, some people seem to have it, and others of us, maybe we're people pleasers or whatever,
Yeah.
we're lacking. And Then I started to research courage, and is there any connection between courage and the health of your physical beating heart? And the actual truth is there is. When we live in fear, our hearts suffer, not just
Huh.
the emotional heart. When we live in fear, we have a more of a rush of adrenaline and certain hormones that cause a constriction of our blood vessels, a tightening, a narrowing, a reduction in oxygen and nutrient flow to our heart and blood vessels, a rising in our blood pressure when it's a chronic emotion. So what's the opposite of fear? Fear, the opposite of fear is courage. Courage is not natural bravery. It's not, I was born this way. Courage is, I like the definition, fear walking. Courage is having the fear, acknowledging the fear, and I kind of go into ways of working with fear before we even get into ways of strengthening our courage.
Yeah.
What I love about courage, Chad, more than anything is the word itself. It comes from Latin, and the Latin word cor means heart.
That's right.
And so for thousands of years, we humans have known that somehow there's a connection between the emotional courage and the beating heart itself. And the science now is showing that that's actually the case.
I like the way that you kind of address like overcoming fear a little bit, because if you're in fear, courage seems far away, and
Yeah.
there's a reason why we're there. Well, what does happen like in the
Mm.
heart when we're under stress? That's maybe a
Yeah.
big question.
Yeah.
But I just feel like we're hearing a lot of what lately about what's going on in the brain, and it's helpful. This is what is exciting to me about
Mm.
knowing more and more what's going on
Mm.
in the body, is that like I can go, okay, if I can understand, like, well, I don't want to drink coffee right away in the morning because I don't want to repress my cortisol, right?
Yeah.
And that is that, let my cortisol come out, because
Yeah.
cortisol can be good. And understanding oxytocin and like how I can get some more oxytocin in my life.
Mm.
Well, what's going on? Just like maybe a couple of nuggets, like of what's going on when we're in stress
Mm.
in the heart, that can
Mm.
be takeaways maybe for like some application to try to not live that way.
Yeah, yeah. There's two thoughts that come to mind, Chad. The first is as you use the word neuroscience, it seems like there's really a fascination with neuroscience, at least in both in the scientific community for the last 40 years, as MRI scanners have developed and functional MRIs and PET scanners, and also in the non-medical community, in more of the coaching and leadership community, or even Nir Eyal's work in neurohacking to use it for marketing purposes. So there's this real
Yeah,
fascination with neuroscience,
there is. Yeah.
which I think that's awesome, and I love it, and I'm all about the brain. And at the same time, I think it does a disservice when we tell the whole story based on what's happening in this small little place up here, where I personally believe, and I think there's evidence for this, that the mind doesn't even just live in the brain. The mind is much bigger than the brain. And so when we talk
Yes.
about the mind-body connection, I think that we're often confused when we think about the mind up here. So I want to offer the fact that maybe in the next decade or so, we can expand our conversations to not just neuroscience, but how the whole body integrates when we're experiencing an emotion, or when we're leading well, or when emotional intelligence is at play. Not just what thoughts are happening or what pathways are active here, but what's happening in the rest of the body. Because as you know, our relationships, our effectiveness in the world are based on our communication ability. And so much of our communication happens beneath our consciousness with our body or with our subconscious expression. So with that as a backdrop, I like to think of it very simply about how the emotions affect our heart and even the rest of the body. And there's three simple pathways in this chain. There's things that happen in the brain itself. So you're getting angry. Somebody violated a core value of yours, which is fairness. So they took more of the money and they left you hanging. And so you've got these activities in the parts of the brain, the limbic system, the amygdala gets active, fight or flight, etc. Prefrontal cortex starts to shut down. We lose some of
Mhm.
our executive function. And so we've got all these brain activities, and then the mind communicates with the body by way of the sympathetic nervous system, and also the parasympathetic nervous system. And then lastly, you alluded to this, the steroid system. So the corticotropic system. So the second step is in the body itself. This flood of chemicals, this surge of nerves, either makes the heart beat faster or slower, either makes the heart feel contracted or constricted, or more warm and expansive. And there has been amazing studies in Finland looking at how people around the world experience different emotions. And there's a common experience of most emotions. You and I, when we feel lonely, we both might feel more of a coldness in our hearts. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Even if we're not in the same place. So to understand the way that the mind, and then the last, so the connection between the mind and the heart happens in the mind, happens in the body, and lastly, it happens in our behavior. What words do we use? What actions do we put forth in the world that are triggered by that emotion, which becomes a feeling in the mind, alters our heart physiology? And then what do we do about it? Do we eat unhealthy foods to comfort ourselves? Do we express our anger in unhealthy ways by yelling at someone, further worsening the cycle? Or do we use some skill and some wisdom to regulate ourselves before communicating our anger in more assertive and healthy ways? So mind, body, behavior.
That's awesome. That is really helpful. I mean, yeah, the bottom line is that the heart is either going faster or slower. What are we doing to make it do one of these things? That is interesting. Yeah. And by the way, I think it's what you had in the second part of your book is the seven, like you're
Timeless
integrating
traits.
timeless traits of wisdom.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I see now, I understand that you are walking a line of wanting to maintain credibility with the scientific community while saying, "Hey, can we look at the whole It's about integration, right?
Yes.
And that is what you're trying to do. You're trying to integrate. We're thinking of the whole person here. And I absolutely love your message. It is a beautifully written book, and we'll do what we can to help promote it. And yeah, I think that it's already selling well, right? You've been talking about going to the post office and signing copies every day. So I think it's a message that needs to get out there. We're so happy to be able to just share this with our audience, and thank you for your time.
Chad, it's wonderful. I get so much gratitude at speaking to people who clearly are in their hearts in this work and helping other people, and I feel that with you and the work that you're doing in the world. And heck, even if we weren't being recorded on a podcast, I would just like to chat with you because you have a lot to share. And this has been a wonderful conversation. And thanks for getting the message out that we need to look at the heart not just in its physical dimension anymore, and not just emotions in its own silo. We have to really start considering the whole human when we look at health and longevity. It's not just a matter of this new trend of how long can I live. It's, can I take care of all dimensions of my heart, the physical, the emotional?
Right.
Can I nourish myself with the positive emotions, the social? Can I have deep and lasting and meaningful relationships, which are the number one predictor of our survival? And then lastly, can we reconnect with some aspect of our spirituality, whatever that means to us, something that goes beyond ourselves? And I'm super happy to be part of this conversation with you. And I'm glad that you got your copy of Just One Heart. There it is. So
there it is.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Jonathan. Yes. Yeah. Thank you for your candor, your vulnerability, your authenticity, sharing things that are unpleasant within yourself that you literally experienced and went through in an effort to humanize, you just humanize what you're going through, what doctors are going through, and you're on the front lines leading, you're leading in this space. So thank you for all of that.
Thank you, Chad.